Welcome, Nicole Ibarra, to the Dish with Dina podcast. I am so excited to have you on today. Thank you so much for agreeing to join me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
You are one of the many, many people on the internet who came across, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about what you do, especially since we are both from the same profession. So, why don't you share with our listeners, our viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, share with us a little bit about what brought you from where you were to how you got involved in the dietetics profession?
Honestly, I would say like my life experience and in combo with my life experience, a family friend of mine kind of really introduced me to the field of dietetics. So the two together kind of went hand in hand to then actually become a dietitian and start helping people in general. So originally, when I was quite young, an adolescent, like in middle school, I was actually overweight, and so I wanted to lose weight myself. So I went through this whole process. And then eventually after that, or through that process, right, I primarily did exercise and nutrition together to do that. Eventually joined track and field. So started kind of that. I was a thrower and did 4x2. And that's because I was a thrower, that really got me into the gym. So that's kind of where strength training came into it. And that's where I started to fall in love with that. So like fitness and nutrition just went hand in hand for me. And then a family friend of mine, she introduced me and was like, "Hey, you should like really think about being a dietitian." And at that point in my life, I didn't know what a dietitian was. So started to look into that because I was nearing the end of high school at that point in time, going into college. And then I found that and I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. So that's eventually kind of what got me into the field, into then the study, the internship, you know the rest of it.
I do know the rest of it. I actually want to ask a little bit more about that too, because a lot of people on the program who have been dietitians or who are currently dietitians, we all have different ways that we've gone through the path. So there are definitely people I've interviewed who have been in this field for 30 years and they've talked about the differences back then versus now. Can you share with our listeners, because a lot of people that do follow this show, they are nutrition students, newly credentialed dietitians, dietetic interns, or just curious about what the value of a dietitian is as far as bringing us into the discussion around healthcare. So, do you mind sharing just a little bit about what some of your rotations involved and how flexible or how strict they might have been, depending on if you went through a traditional route or distance program?
Throughout the internship, it's a whole computer matching system, but you get paired. And then I did get paired and eventually decided to do a distance program. So where I studied college was not where I was born. So I eventually wanted to go back home. And I fell in love with the distance program in general, just because there was more flexibility with it, where you have standard areas, if you will, of dietetics that you have to be involved in. So, like, there's always that clinical rotation that you have to have. There's a community element to there. And then that's where it kind of got to be a little bit more flexible. So, flexible, but it's also, if you do a distance internship, you have to put in a lot of work yourself, because if you go to a traditional one, every single place is already set in stone for you. You have a schedule, you just go do it. A distance internship, you have to find all your different places. So it's cool because you can go to maybe one state over here and then travel to a different state, et cetera, and figure out where you're, rooming and renting and everything like that. But it can be challenging, especially if you are trying to do a rotation near another internship, because those internships that are in that area, like if it's near a university that has one, they already have like solidified spots every single year with certain areas or certain hospitals. So it can be challenging, but that's the route that I decided to go. So I did a distance internship that was based out of Boston. So originally we had to do orientation. So I flew to the East Coast. I'm from Washington. But so flew over to the East Coast, did the orientation there, met all the other interns that were going to go on my program. And then eventually we got set up in small little groups that we kind of kept throughout the whole internship. That was really good for us, honestly, because we got to, if didn't feel like we were necessarily alone in doing this internship. Whereas, like, if you were in an internship with other people, you're in that cohort and you're doing rotations together. So that was really helpful for us. And then, just went throughout, the whole process and finished it and studied really hard, right? So the exam and, all that.
When it comes to that cohort cohesiveness, because that's something that comes up a lot now too, ever since our pandemic and reverting back to maybe working from home, a little bit isolated. And keeping in touch or developing those connections and networking, do you still keep in touch with people from your group? Are you still in contact with them, or did they kind of all part ways after the internship was over?
We're still connected on social media. We don't necessarily like talk with each other often anymore, but yeah, we kind of still see each other's like, life events and that sort of thing, or what they're up to in the field, because we're on LinkedIn too together. So it's kind of couple of different platforms that we're connected with. But always interested in, meeting other dietitians as well, and continuing to network.
Let's jump forward to a current, I never want to say like a typical because things aren't always typical, but what's a current week in the life of you?
At least currently, I will say it changes from season to season. I'm an entrepreneur. I own my own business and practice as well. And so I kind of have my hands in a lot of different baskets, and that's truly what I like. Like that's my passion, is to have my hands in a lot of different things, so I can kind of like utilize my skills in different areas. But right now, what I would say, kind of my season, usually Mondays and Tuesdays are typically the days that I will be with clients. So I usually chalk off times for them there. So that's usually my one-on-one days for people that I'm consulting. And then pretty much the rest of the week, I don't always get a weekend. You're an entrepreneur, so you understand that like there's no real like weekend. You just, you have the responsibilities you have to do. But the rest of the remainder of the week, is pretty much me and my B2B contracts. So that's kind of primarily what I do, is working B2B. So I deal a lot with consulting different types of companies or businesses. I work with like food brands or supplement companies. Maybe they're developing a product. So it's kind of like my advice on that. Or it could be helping them with like their nutrition copywriting. So what they're saying about the product, etc. Freelance writing for them. Could just be a board member of what they're doing, spokesperson for them, anything like that. And then I also do a lot of like food photography too, which is really fun. That's actually something I wanted to do like when I was way, way younger. So it's really interesting how like things eventually kind of come together when as you kind of grow and evolve. But yeah, I do a lot of food photography for, yeah, maybe those food brands or a restaurant or something like that. So there's that mixed into it and whatnot. So yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing for the most part.
This is why I enjoy speaking to people from the dietetics profession, because not everybody has the same path and not everybody has landed in the same space. And especially when, like me and you, we juggle quite a lot of things. So this really gives an idea or an understanding to anyone who might be curious, whether you're going into dietetics or something else, right? Just because you graduated with a degree in something, or you followed a path, took a certification course in something, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stick with that traditional way of executing your profession. You really can wear multiple hats if you have the stomach for it, because I I tend to say it takes a special kind of crazy, especially when it's tax time. Nicole, I'm sure you can agree with
Yeah.
this too, whether you're contracted out or you're doing, payroll things. Will you talk a little bit too, when going back to the client discussion? So you said you do one-on-one nutrition counseling, medical nutrition therapy is kind of like the broad term that what we do in our profession. Do you have a specific audience or population or condition or age range that you tend to see more than others?
So in terms of like age population, I don't really consult adolescents, so just adults 18 and over. Um, and then as far as kind of like areas, I would say I'm kind of like in three main areas, if you will, and a lot of them can kind of like coincide in the same person. So I deal a lot with sports nutrition, which could be someone who's in a specific sport that they want to improve their performance. A lot of those same individuals also have body composition goals. So I deal a lot with weight loss, as I'm sure a lot of dietitians do, and across the board, it's very common, I would say, weight management. So body composition, so building lean muscle mass, losing body fat, that sort of thing. And then I deal a lot with hormonal health, which in our discussion today, right, it might be some reproductive hormones. The only other, I would say, the main two other kind of hormones that I will help people with is someone who has like a thyroid disease or PCOS. And then lastly, would be like gut health. So I deal a lot with like gut health conditions, or if they don't have like a specific condition they want to manage. Some people like have changes in their digestion, and they're like, hey, what's going on? Like, I need help. Like, is there something going on? So we kind of dissect that together, see if there is a root issue that's going on. And then if it's needed, I will refer out to like a gastroenterologist. And so I work with a lot of GI doctors as well.
Yeah. I actually want to dive a little bit deeper there because what you were saying too, and again, with no disrespect to the internship process of things, sometimes you get whatever you get, whether you know where you're going or you're being placed in a rotation or a facility. Sometimes it just depends on what their forte is or how good your preceptor was. And the things that you're talking about, especially with sports nutrition, especially with hormonal health, and especially with gut health, I'm like, did we even talk about these things at length in school? Like, there's a lot of things that we just, we didn't come, we know the basic general recommendations of things, but you're really diving into somewhat of a specialty area in a lot of this patient population. So, did anything pique your interest when you were in your internship rotations and learning things about this? Or it's okay if the answer is no. And then if it is or is not, how did you decide to go into these things and really be able to glean information from maybe some areas that we didn't have when we were going through our curriculum and our internship?
Those kind of specific areas, they weren't actually prioritized, I would say, in my internship. So it wasn't necessarily from the internship itself. Though I guess I could say that some things that I did in my internship was like, okay, I really don't want to do this as a dietitian, which is helpful too, right? So there's that. But honestly, most of it gleamed from kind of going back to like my experience and even like some of my loved ones. So I mentioned earlier about my, losing weight, that sort of thing, all of that. Um, that part kind of stirred my interest into, yes, helping other people who maybe are struggling, who do want to lose some weight. I will definitely help them with that. Also led into the whole strength training and my love for that and helping other people with fitness in general. Don't think I touched on it, but I went through that process when I was quite young, so I really didn't know better. There are some things that I probably did then that I would not tell a client to do now, and so I learned my mistake. But throughout that process, when I was young, I did lose my menstrual cycle. And so I didn't really know what happened. And so I kind of had to go through that, with some healthcare professionals at the time. And so that's kind of what spurred a little bit more of my interest into hormonal health and understanding that a bit more, and helping people through that. And then I don't think I mentioned this either, but my father, he has ulcerative colitis, and so that's kind of initially what stirred. Okay, like what's different gut conditions. What are those like? And so in college, I actually did a project on UC specifically. I wanted to understand that for my father, and at that point, obviously, I knew I was going to be a dietitian. So if I can help my loved ones, I definitely will. So I learned a lot about that, and then also in college, I had the opportunity to do a research project with my professor, one of my professors at the time, and that was about fiber in the microbiome. And so I did that whole research project. That was a lengthy process, and then presented that at a symposium. And so that whole process with, that got me into gut health. So all of those things in combos, really kind of why I was like, I need to learn more about this. And then, as a dietitian, we got to get education credits. So that also helps to continue to stay on top of all of those topics and really kind of dive deep into them.
Yeah, you really do have such a specialty, and they are hot topics. And I think the more we learn about these things, they are challenging and complex, but I think we can help people manage them to the best of their ability. I also want to dive a little bit or hone in on the discussion around hormonal health because I entered into my menopause years about 4 years ago or so. And you would think, right, like I know what to expect, but really not a lot of information was provided to me. And so share with us your approach. Like, what is it? And it doesn't necessarily have to be just hormonal health. What is some of the things that you tend to see most often? What kind of patient population questions come up or challenges come up most often? What kind of approach do you take to that as well? Because I think anything that helps those of us who are curious about how to manage something, at least hearing from somebody like you, we now have an arsenal tools, questions that we can ask our own healthcare providers, and we can help understand our condition a little bit better.
Yeah, well, in terms of kind of perimenopause, you alluded to it a little bit. So you're kind of in that period of time. So perimenopause is like this transition period where it's you go through it. I'd say it occurs, it varies for every woman, but I'd say the range is probably like 3 to 10 years of a time frame to go through these different hormonal changes to then hit menopause, which um, most people think menopause is throughout the rest of your life, but really it's a birthday, kind of, if you will. So, you go through perimenopause after 12 months of no menstrual cycles, then you hit menopause. And then after that point, it's postmenopausal. Um, so that's like the whole transition kind of period throughout that life cycle. As for symptoms or someone that, when you're going through that whole phase, between perimenopause and menopause, there's a lot of changes that will start to happen. And, initially, to give a little bit more context, when I say hormonal changes, it's most people think like just the hormones tank completely at once, and that's not really the case. Um, Estrogen, I like to tell my clients, it's more like a roller coaster where there's like ups and downs and ups and downs. So there's like large spikes and drops in estrogen, and progesterone, which is the other reproductive hormone for women, that starts to kind of just slowly kind of dissipate. And so the two in combo, so lower progesterone and kind of high spikes of estrogens and declines, can contribute to, some of those symptoms that you might be experiencing, right? So some people might experience like more migraines, headaches, especially if they're still having periods, but like right before, their period. Maybe they're having spotting, where typically they wouldn't have spotting, or they start to notice shorter time frames between periods. So like, a normal healthy cycle, and then now it's a little bit uh, shorter, and then eventually the spacing between your two periods, like you start to skip a couple, and things kind of get more erratic, if you will. Some women will have like really heavy flows. So maybe they missed a couple, they'll have a heavy flow. Usually the heavy flows happen when there's a large spike in estrogen, and then progesterone's again kind of lowering, so the two in combo can contribute to a heavy flow. Um, and then sometimes that spotting that I mentioned earlier, that can happen because of the progesterone being a little bit lower. So one of progesterone's roles in the body is really to help maintain that endometrial lining. So if that's not happening, you're kind of starting to spot a little bit. And other things, hot flashes, really common with women, sleep disturbances, night sweats, all those sorts of things. They'll eventually have like joint pain is definitely common, I would say. Low libido, vaginal dryness eventually, all of those kind of in combo. Some women during that period of time, more anxiety, depression, mood swings, that sort of thing.
Since we are qualified in the food and nutrition realm, but this is not the only thing that you're speaking to your patients about or your clients about, because there's so many different lifestyle habits to discuss. What are some of the target things that you're helping support? Like, are you helping them prioritize food, micronutrients, sleep habits, physical activity? What are some of the things that you tend to focus on first? And obviously, as always, we disclaim at the very beginning, at the very end of all these conversations, that this is just for general information, but also, assuming that this is an individual thing. But what are some of the things that you tend to kind of focus in first and go through the checklist, if you will?
First and foremost, for like women that are in this time of their life, really at any age I would recommend it, but especially in this time of life, if they can start engaging in any sort of resistance exercise. So that could be initially body weight, that could be some resistance bands. Eventually I would definitely like someone to kind of hit maybe some dumbbells or barbell or something to like more heavier weight, if you will. And the primary reason as to why that is, there's really a couple of different reasons. So we touched on estrogen. Estrogen in the body, it gets a bad rap, sadly, but it does have some like really important functions for us, right? One of them is it is a more anabolic hormone, meaning it can help us with muscle protein and developing that. So as that kind of starts to decline, right, you will notice a little bit less like decreased metabolism, for instance. So that's going to happen. Which in combo can obviously contribute to weight gain, which is what a lot of women struggle with in this period of their life. Like, my body doesn't feel the same. Like I'm starting to gain weight. I don't obviously enjoy that. My body's changing, right? Which we do have to come to terms with too, right? And like understanding that this is a natural part of life, but adjusting that. So resistance training for that standpoint. Um, Estrogen is also insulin sensitive. So, with that, if estrogen's declining, right, we can become a little bit more insulin resistant. So, women at this age, right, it puts you at risk for developing diabetes in the future. Um, so that's really important to kind of start to handle with nutrition, which we'll get into as well. But yeah, resistance training is really helpful for that, for supporting our lean muscle mass, because that does start, regardless of gender, that as we age, muscle loss and bone health are really important. They'll start to kind of decline a bit. So engaging in resistance training can help to build lean muscle mass, can support bone health, and then also does help with insulin sensitivity. So it kind of helps to combat all of that as well. So that's definitely one of the things that I recommend for women to do. And then pairing with resistance training is definitely going to be to prioritize protein. So protein really important to get a total amount throughout your whole day. But aside from that, making sure you have protein at every single meal and snack. So really spacing that out throughout the day. Very, very important. High quality protein if you can. So higher quality protein is definitely from animal sources. If you are vegetarian, you can still get sufficient protein, just work with a dietitian to do that, because that could be challenging for some people for sure. But yeah, prioritizing that, and then in combo with that too, with the protein, because you're a little bit more insulin resistance at this stage, I usually tell people like no naked carbs. So try not to have carbs alone. Try to pair it with a protein source if you can, or a healthy fat source, so that we can kind of mitigate the digestion of those carbohydrates to help prevent maybe diabetes in the future. Those are at least some of the things.
I would like, if you don't mind, just talking a little bit about some sensitive topics here around, especially people who are coming to terms with entering into a new phase of life, feeling that things might be a little bit stubborn for them, things are changing as far as body composition is concerned, but also if they are not necessarily prone to or have never done physical activity before, it can feel like then they go into restricting their diet instead. So, can you share a little bit about the importance of making sure that we are being well fed, that we shouldn't be afraid of certain things to venture in, and like how much is too much or how little is too little before we start getting a little concerned that this might be falling into more of a disordered eating pattern, especially if they've maybe had some chronic dieting patterns in their past decades of life as well?
Definitely eating enough is really important. So we know that the metabolism is slowing down a bit, but if you cut calories too low, that's really going to backfire on you, right? It's going to continue to negatively hurt your metabolism. It's going to be even harder to lose weight. So if that was something that someone wanted to do, losing weight, cutting calories isn't the way to do it, right? You want to eat sufficiently for your needs. So supporting your metabolism, and then in combo with that, trying to engage in activity, right? Resistance training is really wonderful. Another tool that I'll use with people is daily steps, and making sure that, hey, let's just in general be active. That doesn't mean that, you know, um, you have to like be on the treadmill, like just simply adding steps throughout your day, just getting a little bit more motion in there, is really important. But yes, you do kind of you have a really good point there with restrictive eating, some of the patterns that maybe they've had in the past, where maybe they were brought up with someone that was like, hey, you should watch what you eat, or like those sorts of comments can really be instilled and stay in a person for a long time. So I do work with clients to kind of unpack that a little bit, like, hey, where did this come from? And like, a lot of these same people, because of those situations, they would have gone on the whole yo-yo dieting, like, try this diet, it didn't work, like, let's try this new one, and like go down that whole path, which is really restrictive and doesn't support a healthy relationship with food whatsoever, and definitely down the road could lead to an eating disorder. I can't speak too much on eating disorders. I'm not really specialized there. I would refer out for that, but if I see that sort of disordered, like severe disordered eating, I would definitely refer out. But if it's kind of more generalized, like they have maybe fears around certain things because of maybe the misinformation that's out there. That's definitely a big passion of mine, combating all the misinformation. But if it's something like that, then we'll kind of unpack that. Hey, where'd that come from? And then I'll start to kind of work and help them with their relationship to really understand that all of these foods are really important and part of like a very healthy, well balanced diet. And I'll challenge them at times to, hey, let's start to add this food in and let's see how you feel. Like, how did that go? Right. And then they'll be like, oh wow, like I feel more energized. Really? Okay. You added carbs back in and you feel that's really great. I'm really happy to hear that. And then we just kind of work through that to really restore that relationship again.
This is where I want to take a moment to acknowledge how awesome that we are as dietitians because I think, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think the general belief is that either we're the food police where we're like monitoring everything that somebody's putting in their mouth, or all we do is churn out meal plans. And that is not the case. And as a matter of fact, a lot of us don't really want to do certain things like that. But you can see what Nicole is saying. Like there's such nuance behind all of these things. And there's so many behavioral components to this that it really does, I think it does to the patient or the client a disservice if all we do is come in, weigh, measure, here, eat this, don't eat that, and off you go. Like it's really great that we have, hopefully, especially in the case of private practice too, where we maybe have a little bit more control over our session time, that we can really dive a little deeper into what is at the root of all of that. How do we reestablish your relationship with food and also get you to a place where you're starting to even enjoy, dare we say, enjoy eating more and working out or doing things that you've never done before? I think also, just as a general statistic, people who are entering into the menopausal phase of their lives are usually people in, they're maybe mid to late 40s. They maybe have already had children, or they have children who are going into school, and maybe they've not necessarily prioritized themselves in a really long time because they've been juggling family and work, etc. So this really gives people an opportunity to kind of get in touch with themselves again, rediscover who they are, who they were, and breathe new life into the next decades of life instead of rolling their eyes and being like, great, now I'm in menopause and this is going to suck and I'm sweaty all the time. It's like, no, this is like, we have the privilege of aging and this is so wonderful for you to go into this next chapter. So I hope if anybody is watching or listening to this discussion right now that you're taking away some of those things. I can speak from my experience, having now been, like I said, 4 years out from not having a period anymore, that I'm starting to come to terms with just like, aside from the fact every time I sneeze, I pull a muscle somewhere, aside from that, but I'm really enjoying carving out time for myself. Even today, or was it today or last night? I had like, I don't know, 20 minutes between running errands and trying to do laundry. And while laundry was in the dryer, I ran across the street and I ran on the treadmill for maybe it was 12 to 15 minutes, and that was it. And the music in my headphones and the fact that I was getting sweat on and I was pumping through everything, it just made me feel so good. And then I was home and I was able to kind of like relax into the rest of my evening because I felt like I got the workout out of the way. It helped me with managing some of the stress that I was dealing with as well, Nicole, which I'm sure that's also a benefit too of prioritizing some of these workout routines or this physical activity too. Being able to just, it's not selfish to take care of yourself. And that's something that comes up a lot too. It's okay that you're juggling a bunch of things, your kids need you or your family needs you or your work needs you, but you cannot be pouring from an empty vessel, my friends. So make sure that you're prioritizing yourself. Nicole, is there anything that you want to share? Because we did touch just now a little bit about things like social media and maybe like hot topics. Do you want to share anything about some things that kind of grind your gears or get you all heated up, or things that you might want to dispel, like misinformation or myths that exist out there, whether or not they're related to hormone health or not?
Well, I guess we could knock out the carbs too, because that I feel like, it was fat a while ago, and now it's back to carbs because it was carbs and fat, now carbs again. Protein never seems to come up in that, which I don't think it will because there's so many benefits, but there's still a lot of people. I consult many of them on it. They, are still fearful of carbs. Maybe they tried the Atkins diet, long ago. Maybe they were interested in the keto diet and they thought that that was really awesome. But then they found out eventually it wasn't very sustainable for them, so they went off of that. But they're still fearful of carbs because when they try to add them back in, then they see the scale go up, and so they kind of associate that with, oh, the carbs are making me fat, which carbs. They won't make you fat, right? Being in a calorie surplus is what we would call it. So eating more than you burn will make you gain fat, and that can come from carbs, protein, or fats, right? It can come from any of it. But um, that association with the scale, what's really happening is when you remove carbs from your diet, right? So like let's say someone's going to try the keto diet, right? They remove carbs, severely restrict them. Our body naturally has what we call glycogen stores, which is like temporary storage of carbs, because our body prefers carbs as a fuel source. And typically, what happens in that process is that we hold water with that. So, really, what you're seeing initially on that scale is a quick drop in that water weight because you're depleting those glycogen stores. And so what's really happening is that's what's happening when you restrict them. And then when you add them back in, it's like, oh, I gained like 5 pounds. No, you did not gain 5 pounds just by adding some more beans or a slice of bread or something like that. And like that's not really what happened. Um, but so there's that part, right? The fats are associated with, that'll make me fat, or they're fat to mean, right? Like pastas or all this other stuff. But you can definitely include them in your diet, right? It's definitely important to portion that out, right? We don't want too much at once. We want a very well balanced meal in general. So that would be important. The other thing with carbs is that if you do severely restrict them, that will definitely impact your thyroid as well. So, and thyroid is a tiny and very mighty gland that we have that supports our metabolism. So that's something that I usually dive into with people who, again, with thyroid disease. It's sometimes common to eat enough carbs too.
Again, it's this whole fear around gaining weight. That's really the end all, is like, I don't want to have to go buy new pants or whatever. But meanwhile, you don't realize that you're doing some metabolic disruption or damage to certain things that underneath it all are going to be more consequential down the line versus just you feeling somewhat more comfortable in your clothes. So this is something to really keep in mind, is whatever approach you're taking, and hopefully you are working with a dietitian whenever you are making adjustments to your diet, especially if you are managing a condition. But whatever approach you're taking, just be aware that there's some sort of effect that's happening in some way. And sometimes it's a positive effect, and sometimes it might be a negative effect. And also, I think this might be a good time to also point out people around you who might be watching you have that adjustment, whether it's, yay, look at you going for prioritizing your health and getting all in shape and stuff, versus, okay, now she's struggling, or now she's falling back or reverting to something, or you feel bad or good or guilty. So the language that we use around maybe children or loved ones, this could really have some effects as well that we might not necessarily see at the onset, but later down the line, it can come up in some of those discussions too, that now we've kind of modeled certain behaviors that might not be necessarily positive. So thank you for sharing all of that, Nicole. What is the future you going to be? Like, do you think you're going to eventually step away from one of the many things that you do and focus a little bit more on something else? Tell us a little bit about what your 2 to 5 to 10 year plan might be.
Something I've been kind of contemplating, not that this is like in the next year or two, it's probably more a little bit further out there. But I've definitely contemplated on, as I mentioned earlier, I've worked with many supplement companies and food brands. And so honestly, I would eventually like to maybe create my own either supplement or food product itself. Because, I kind of understand that process. And, especially the supplement industry is still a very wild west area where it's not regulated. So having maybe more dietitians, right, making those types of products, has a little bit more backing to it than um, just some random brand you don't really know of. It's not regulated by the FDA. Yeah. So possibly that. I think that's definitely something that's in the future. I still love working B2B, so definitely continuing to consult or do food photography and freelance writing and whatnot, or in the media, anything like that for sure.
Oh, I love that. Well, whatever you end up doing, I'm sure it's going to be very successful, because I know how much heart and soul you put into things. Is there anything that we didn't cover today? Anything that words of wisdom or some side notes that you might want to share that I didn't ask you about?
I think the other thing to consider would be managing stress in general. So, high stress continued, throughout can contribute to, abdominal fat, right? And that can also kind of contribute to maybe, if you think about like kind of what we mentioned earlier with diabetes being at risk for that as well, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, like all those sorts of things. And heart disease is the leading cause in the United States of death above cancer. So it's definitely something to consider. And just managing stress in general from, yeah, exercise or managing stress with breath work, journaling, right? As women, sometimes this is very generalized, but some women, right, will kind of keep things in. So journaling can really help to kind of get out thoughts, emotions. If not that, please go to therapy, like really kind of process things. Um, and take the time, like you said that you were, like take the time for yourself during this time. Learn about yourself. What are you passionate about? What do you like doing in this kind of new season of life, right? You might be, some people retire early, so you might be early retirement. You might have a little bit more time. Um, but combat all the stress of maybe what you're experiencing with all those symptoms, and like life changes too, in kind of perimenopause period. Some people might still have their parents, so maybe they're an older adult and maybe they have to be a caregiver, and so there's maybe some stress associated with that. So really, I would just emphasize, try to find time for you and to do that self-care, manage that stress so that you can just prioritize yourself, your mental health as well.
Well, this is a great segue for me to ask you a question about how do you manage your own lifestyle habits, self-care, and what are some of like your non-negotiables? Like if everything was crammed into a day or a week as far as work-wise, because we were joking before about, what is even a weekend free, but what are some things that are absolutely must be done in your world so that you're managing your own health and wellness?
One of that would definitely be activity. So, I'm definitely in the gym. I can't be there like every single day, nor would I want to. You got to prioritize rest and recovery. But so trying to do that for stress management, it's one of my stress relievers that is going to the gym. Yeah, hydration, I think, is still underutilized. So making sure that you're staying hydrated, especially it's like I'm in California right now, so it's really hot here. It's like above 100 consistently. So keeping up on hydration for sure throughout the day. So always have water next to me, something like that. And then well balanced meals, as much as I can. I try to do a little bit of meal planning so I tentatively know what I'm making or have some things kind of prepared ahead of time, which is also always important to support, your nutrition, of course.
Nicole, I so appreciate our conversation. I always end on a two-parter question at the very end of my episodes, which is what is on your plate today? So you're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast, you're kind of still like mid-ish afternoon there, and I'm coming up on I'm an early bird special type of gal because I'm almost in my retirement years at this point. But what are you doing next after we disconnect? What is the next thing you're working on? And then what is the next meal that you'll be having if you know what that is?
Yeah, so it's kind of like later in the week. So I'm going to be kind of working on one of my contracts. It's probably need to work a little bit more on one of the supplement companies that I have. So kind of working into some research on their product, and it's actually a gut health kind of product. So we'll be working a little bit more on that, doing some research for them. So that'll probably take the majority of my day today. And then as far as food, I haven't necessarily figured it out yet. I do have shrimp in the fridge, so maybe something with shrimp. And figure out a side dish with that. But yeah, that's really quick to make, so we're probably making that tonight.
That goes within the whole entrepreneur juggling many things. You can't be sitting there working on a 4-hour 30 ingredient recipe when we are super busy gals. Well, Nicole, it's been a real pleasure again getting to know you, getting to learn more about you. I so appreciate your insight into the menopause discussion, hormone health. I really think that people who are watching or listening to this are going to take away so many things to help educate them and help them then go forward and question and ask questions about whatever they might need with their healthcare providers. So thank you so much for being on here. It was really cool to talk to you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Dina. I appreciate it.